Californians went to the polls this week and voted to reject bilingual education. The action may inspire similar measures nationwide, but still questions linger, including, does bilingual education help or harm students trying to learn English? Here to discuss the matter, the author of the California proposition, Ron Unz, and Victor Morales, Democratic House candidate from Texas. Also here, my colleague, Brit Hume. Mr. Unz, you're rich, you're white, you're single. Why should you care?
Well, I mean, I've been somebody interested in the issue of bilingual education for many years. My mother was born in Los Angeles, but grew up not speaking a word of English. She learned English very quickly and easily as a young child, and I've never understood why children aren't taught English as soon as they start school. But the origins of this particular initiative go back to 1996, when I read a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times describing how a group of immigrant Latino parents in downtown Los Angeles have to actually start a public boycott of their local elementary school because it refused to teach their children English. And when a system has reached the point where parents have to carry picket signs because schools refuse to teach English, I think it's gone off the deep end. And that started me checking into it, and I never realized how bad the system was and how much it needed really to be stopped.
Mr. Morales, isn't it true that bilingual education sometimes does, in fact, stereotype Hispanic students?
No, I don't think so. The experience I've had with people that teach bilingual education is great. It's a great program that has, yes, certain problems. But it always bothers me that you always have these little stories like, for example, the picketing parents, and use that to knock down an entire program. Sure, there are problems, but let's go after that. There's not enough bilingual teachers, for example. There are many school districts that don't throw their weight behind it as they should. And with all respect to Mr. Unz's mom, I mean, she's a great case, a wonderful example of someone who's able to do that, but that doesn't speak for everyone.
Mr. Morales, did you have a bilingual education?
No, I didn't. I grew up in an Anglo-American neighborhood. And my parents spoke a lot of what we call Tex-Mex, you know, half English and half Spanish.
How would you say, sir, that you came to know the language that you now speak so well?
Well, I had parents, for example, who spoke both all the way growing up. And then I was in an area, again, that I didn't have a Spanish kids there.
So you were totally immersed, so to speak.
No, I had at home also I had Spanish, so all the time I had both. And I'm very glad, you know, it always amazes me here in our country we're still going back and forth on this. I have students from Europe who come over as exchange students, and they speak 3 languages, and we're still fighting about 2.
Well, Mr. Morales, you've said that you don't think that, you think the bilingual education always works, but you also say there are problems.
No, not always. No, sir. No, sir, not always.
What are the problems?
There are problems. Again, one of them I referred to earlier was that many districts don't have enough bilingual teachers. I mean, DISD here in Texas, for example, is short about 600. So they're, to say that it's failing because a certain number of students are not learning, well, you need to look deeper into that. Is the program supported in the district? Are there enough teachers? And you can always find examples no matter what you're talking about.
So spend more money.
Well, no, that's just one example. Of course, there are many districts where money does need to be spent, but that's not the only answer. Well, but again, this is a very complex problem, and to think, okay, here's a story, an example of these picketing parents that didn't work. Well, we've already been down the road where English only didn't work.
Well, Mr. Unz, there you hear the case made. The argument seems to be that bilingual education will work if it's properly supported and if there are enough teachers proficient in doing it. What do you say to that, Mr. Unz?
Well, I mean, I come from a scientific background. Bilingual education may or may not work in theory, but it seems to virtually never work in practice in the real-life world where we have constraints on the system. Let's look at the official government statistics in California from the Office of Bilingual Education up in the state capitol. Each year in California, 1/4 of all the children in California public schools don't know English. And of the ones who start a school year not knowing English, only about 5 or 6% learn English. In other words, 95% of the children who start a given school year in California not knowing English at the beginning of that school year have not learned English by the end of the school year. And I think any system with a 95% failure rate after 30 years of trying to make it work should not be continued.
Well, now, so you've now succeeded in California with this initiative. Where do you go next, Mr. Unz? Anywhere?
Well, I mean, I think half of all the bilingual programs in the country are in California. I think we've ended them largely in the last few days. Therefore, I think most other states around the country should very closely re-examine their programs and decide whether they're worth maintaining. Now, I don't know as much of the details in Texas and other states, and I think California probably had the worst bilingual programs. But I was on a radio show just a few days ago in Texas where one of the callers was a Mexican immigrant himself who'd been in the United States for a while, and he was saying how the school his young son goes to does not teach English to children, and the only way the children learn English in San Antonio is if the other children teach it to them. I think there's a good chance that congressional legislation will move forward to shift the country away from funding bilingual education and more towards funding intensive English programs for children. It's a very simple idea. If young children start school not knowing English, the schools should teach it to them as quickly as possible.
Mr. Morales, let's give Mr. Morales' opinion.
I don't know how many classes he's been to. I don't know how many school districts he's been to, but the school districts I'm aware of do teach English. They teach both. And I've had students who've come in the school district that didn't have bilingual education and didn't know what I was talking about. And I'm telling you, what that will do to the teachers is unreal. To have to stop and come down to that one student and explain everything, because a poor student who may be very intelligent in all probability doesn't understand what you're saying.
Mr. Morales, if bilingual education is so good, how come Hispanic students in Texas lag behind the others?
Again, that sounds like the old attack on public schools. You know, we've got kids who have killed in a few instances, so that the whole public school system is down. There's a lot of different reasons beside bilingual education that you could pick on to show why there are problems. But again, it's like people were saying that private schools and parochial schools are so good. You could find many problems with those too if you wanted to look. Statistics, we can all play with those.
Well, Mr. Morales, I've been a school teacher, and I know one of the problems that happens is sometimes students do get stereotyped, and as a result, teachers don't expect enough of them. Is that a problem?
Oh, of course that's a problem. That's human nature. You have teachers who do that, absolutely. But again, attacking bilingual education as the reason for that is, I think, is just not reality.
So you don't think you think bilingual education is there to stay in Texas?
I do believe so, and I think it needs to be constantly worked with and tried to be improved. Again, as you remember, I said at the very beginning, there is no doubt there are some problems. If someone's not being taught in English, it needs to be corrected.
So very quickly, any student from any background who doesn't speak English, therefore, should get bilingual education?
Well, my understanding, there's a lot of programs, again, with Vietnamese, and this is nothing new. We had back in the old days
what about
German
the question?
programs.
What about the question? The question is this, do you hear an argument here at all for some flexibility in this, or should it be bilingual education or nothing?
No, if the student doesn't need bilingual education, he shouldn't be in there.
Well, no, I'm talking about people who don't yet speak English, obviously, sir. I mean, are you saying that there should be no opportunity for a total immersion learning of English in Texas's schools?
I think it's a mistake putting everybody in 1 year and then out.
Mr. Unz, you want to answer that?
Well, let's look at California. There are children who enter the public schools speaking 140 different languages. The only group of immigrant children that receive large quantities of bilingual instruction are Latino immigrant children who speak Spanish. And of all the immigrant groups, they do the worst in school, with the highest dropout rates and the lowest test scores and the lowest rate of admissions to college. If bilingual education is a beneficial program, why is it that the immigrant group that gets the most of it does the worst in school?
Mr. Morales?
Well, obviously, you should know why it gets the most of it. 80% of the students are Hispanic. The numbers are there. Second of all, look at the dropout rate before bilingual education.
Wait a minute. Say that again?
I said, why are there more programs for Hispanics? Well, there's 80% of those kids are Hispanic in LET.
No, that's not the point he made. The point he made was that the Hispanics get the most bilingual education and do the worst. How do you account for that?
They're doing much better than they did when they were in English immersion only.
Do you know that for a fact?
Yes.
Mr. Unz?
About 80% about 50 to 80% of Hispanic students didn't even get past the 8th grade back when it was English only. So the numbers have gone down tremendously.
Mr. Unz, you want to answer that?
First of all, I really don't think sink or swim, which was the method 40 years ago, is the best approach. What we're advocating is intensive sheltered English immersion, where you put children who don't know the language and are starting school at 5 or 6 years old in an intensive English program, and after a few months or a year, once they've learned English, you mainstream them. Now, if you look at other countries in the world, there are many other countries that have large immigrant populations. none of them use what we call bilingual education. They all use the sort of short-term intensive language programs that our initiative calls for, and they do much better than the programs we have in the United States. And again, children who come here from Russia, children who come here from Vietnam, from all these other countries in California are not given native language instruction.
Okay,
and
Ron
they do
Unz.
much better in school.
Ron Unz, you're going to have the final word. Thanks for joining us. Victor Morales, thanks for joining us as well.